My name is Natasha Hartwell, and at 29, I've learned that sometimes the people closest to you can hurt you the most, especially when they think they know your worth better than you do. When my younger sister Cassandra announced she was marrying Trevor Ashworth, heir to one of Denver's most prominent real estate families, I genuinely celebrated her happiness. What I didn't expect was to become invisible in my own family's eyes, treated like an outsider at what should have been one of the most important days of our lives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. If only I had known that the very venue where they seated me with the catering staff was actually mine. But life has a funny way of serving justice exactly when you need it most, especially at a wedding that would change everything forever. Before I tell you what happened that day, where are you watching from? Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt invisible or underestimated by people who should have valued you. I promise this story of sweet vindication will remind you that your worth isn't determined by how others see you, but by who you truly are when no one's watching. Growing up in Fort Collins, Colorado, Cassandra and I were as different as mountain snow and desert sand. She was 2 years younger, but always seemed to command attention effortlessly. While I spent my teenage years working part-time jobs and saving every penny, Cassie was crowned homecoming queen and dated the captain of the football team. Our parents, both hardworking teachers, loved us equally, but always seemed more concerned about my practical sister, who appeared to need less guidance than their responsible older daughter. Natasha will figure it out became their default response whenever questions about our futures came up. She always does. And I did figure it out, quietly, methodically, without fanfare or family discussions about my dreams and ambitions. After high school, while Cassie attended Colorado State University on a partial cheerleading scholarship, I took a different path entirely. I'd always been fascinated by hospitality and event planning, drawn to the magic of creating perfect moments for people's most important celebrations. But instead of pursuing a traditional degree, I apprenticed under Martha Wellington, owner of Wellington Manor, one of Colorado's most exclusive event venues. Martha was a formidable woman in her 70s who had built her empire from nothing, starting with a small bed and breakfast in the 1980s and expanding into luxury event hosting. She saw something in me that even my own family seemed to miss, a natural understanding of what made events truly special, combined with the business acumen to make dreams profitable. For 3 years, I worked 18-hour days learning every aspect of the business. I studied floral design, mastered vendor relationships, learned to read clients' unspoken needs, and most importantly, developed an eye for the tiny details that transformed good events into unforgettable experiences. Martha taught me about profit margins, seasonal pricing, marketing to high-end clientele, and how to handle the egos and demands of Colorado's social elite. When Martha's health began declining, she made me an offer that changed my life forever. She said, "Natasha, I've watched you build something beautiful here. This place needs someone who understands its soul, not just its financial potential." She offered to sell me Wellington Manor for a fraction of its market value, with a payment plan that would allow me to buy her out over 5 years. The catch was complete confidentiality until the ownership transfer was legally finalized. Martha wanted to retire quietly, without the media attention and social drama that would inevitably follow the announcement of her departure from Colorado's event planning scene. For 2 years, I've been the actual owner of Wellington Manor, while Martha remained the public face of the business. Our clients believe they're working with Martha Wellington's protege, not knowing they're actually dealing with the new owner. The arrangement allowed me to learn the administrative side while Martha gradually stepped back from day-to-day operations. The irony wasn't lost on me that I spent my days creating fairy tale weddings for other families, while my own family remained largely unaware of my professional success. When conversation turned to my work at family gatherings, I'd simply say I was working in event planning and change the subject. It seemed easier than explaining the complexities of my situation, especially when Cassie's college adventures and social achievements dominated most family discussions anyway. 6 months ago, when Cassie announced her engagement to Trevor Ashworth, I was genuinely thrilled for her. Trevor came from serious money. His family owned half the commercial real estate in downtown Denver, and he seemed to adore my sister's vivacious personality and stunning looks. When she asked me to help with wedding planning, I eagerly agreed, excited to finally share my expertise with someone I loved. What I didn't anticipate was how Trevor's family would treat me, or how quickly my own family would adopt their perspective. From the moment I met Trevor's mother, Patricia Ashworth, at their engagement party, I could sense her measuring me against some invisible standard and finding me lacking. Her questions about my little event planning job carried a subtle condescension that made it clear she viewed me as the less successful sister, someone grateful to be included in their elevated social circle. But today's wedding would prove that sometimes the people who underestimate you are in for the biggest surprises of their lives. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Growing up in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, Cassandra and I shared more than just our parents' modest two-bedroom house on Maple Street. We shared a complicated sisterhood that was equal parts fierce loyalty and unspoken competition. Despite being only 2 years apart, we inhabited completely different worlds within the same family. I was the early riser who helped Mom prepare breakfast before school, the one who remembered to feed our ancient golden retriever Chester, and the daughter who never needed reminding about homework or chores. Cassie was the whirlwind who rushed downstairs 5 minutes before the school bus arrived, somehow looking effortlessly beautiful while I had been awake for an hour making sure her lunch was packed alongside my own. Our parents, David and Linda Hartwell, were both middle school teachers who believed in hard work, education, and treating people with respect regardless of their background. Dad taught science while Mom handled English literature, and their combined teacher salaries meant we lived comfortably but carefully. Every vacation was planned months in advance, every major purchase required family discussion, and both Cassie and I understood that our college educations would require scholarships, part-time jobs, and student loans. Natasha has an old soul, Mom would tell relatives at family barbecues, watching me organize games for younger cousins while Cassie held court with the teenagers, effortlessly charming adults with her bright smile and quick wit. Mom would tell relatives at family barbecues, watching me organize games for younger cousins while Cassie held court with the teenagers, effortlessly charming adults with her bright smile and quick wit. She's always been so responsible, so focused on taking care of everyone else. Dad would nod in agreement, adding, "That's why we never worry about Tasha. She's got her head on straight, always has a plan. Cassie's the one who keeps us on our toes." Their words were meant kindly, but they carved out roles we both unconsciously accepted. I became the dependable one, the problem solver, the daughter who could be counted on to handle anything without complaint or drama. During high school, while Cassie was elected to student council and starred in the spring musical, I worked 20 hours a week at Romano's Italian restaurant, saving money for a car and college while learning the intricate dance of restaurant service. Something about the controlled chaos of busy dinner shifts appealed to me, the way experienced servers could anticipate guests' needs, how the kitchen coordinated dozens of orders simultaneously, and most fascinating to me, how the right atmosphere could transform a simple meal into a memorable experience. My manager, Tony Romano, noticed my natural instinct for hospitality. "You've got an eye for details, Natasha," he told me after I reorganized the server station to improve efficiency during Friday night rushes. "Most people see tables and customers. You see the whole experience, how the lighting affects the mood, why certain table arrangements work better, how music volume can make or break a romantic dinner." Meanwhile, Cassie was crowned homecoming queen our senior year, dated star quarterback Jake Morrison, and seemed to float through high school on a cloud of popularity and effortless charm. Teachers loved her enthusiasm, classmates sought her friendship, and college recruiters noticed her combination of academic achievement and extracurricular involvement. The difference in our paths became most apparent during family discussions about college plans.
Cassie had been accepted to Colorado State University with a partial cheerleading scholarship, planning to major in communications with dreams of working in sports broadcasting or public relations. Her future seemed bright, clear, and exciting to everyone around our dinner table. When I mentioned my interest in hospitality management, specifically event planning and venue operations, the response was more subdued. "That's nice, honey, but maybe you should consider something more stable. Business administration or education, perhaps. You could always do event planning as a side business." Dad, ever practical, worried about the financial uncertainty of the hospitality industry. "The restaurant business is tough, Tasha. Lots of long hours, weekend work, dealing with difficult customers. Are you sure you wouldn't prefer something with more regular hours and better benefits?" Their concerns came from love, but they also revealed an uncomfortable truth. My career aspirations as less ambitious than Cassie's, more suited to someone who would be grateful for steady work rather than someone capable of building something extraordinary.
I didn't argue or try to convince them otherwise. Instead, I quietly researched hospitality programs, visited venue operations, and eventually discovered Martha Wellington through a summer internship program at Wellington Manor. The moment I walked through those elegant French doors and saw Martha orchestrating a garden wedding with the precision of a symphony conductor, I knew I had found my calling. Martha was everything I hoped to become: sophisticated, successful, and completely in command of her domain. She had built Wellington Manor from a crumbling Victorian mansion into Colorado's most sought-after wedding venue, hosting celebrations for governors, celebrities, and old money families who valued discretion and impeccable service above flashy displays. Excellence isn't about having the most expensive flowers or the finest china, Martha explained during my first week as her apprentice. Excellence is about understanding what makes each celebration unique and creating an experience that exceeds expectations in ways guests never anticipated. Under Martha's mentorship, I learned that successful event planning required the organizational skills of a military strategist, the creativity of an artist, the diplomacy of an ambassador, and the business acumen of a CEO. Every wedding taught me something new about human nature, family dynamics, and the incredible responsibility of helping people celebrate life's most important moments. While Cassie was pledging sororities and attending football games, I was learning to read weather patterns for outdoor ceremonies, master the logistics of serving dinner to 300 guests simultaneously, and handle the inevitable crises that arose when powerful families gathered to celebrate love while navigating decades of complex relationships. By my junior year at Wellington Manor, I was effectively managing most day-to-day operations, while Martha focused on client development and long-term business strategy. I had developed relationships with Colorado's best vendors, earned the trust of our most demanding clients, and discovered a natural talent for turning stressful situations into seamless solutions. But at family gatherings, when relatives asked about my work, I still downplayed my responsibilities, describing myself as Martha's assistant or working in event planning, rather than explaining the scope of my actual role. It seemed easier than dealing with questions I wasn't ready to answer, especially since Martha and I had agreed to keep our ownership transition completely confidential until all legal and financial arrangements were finalized. This pattern of modest understatement would prove to have consequences I never anticipated, particularly when it came to planning the most important event of my sister's life. The transition from Martha's apprentice to Wellington Manor's actual owner happened gradually, then all at once. During my third year working under Martha's guidance, I had quietly enrolled in evening business courses at the University of Colorado, Denver, driving the hour each way after long days at the venue. While other students my age were experiencing typical college life, I was studying corporate finance in lecture halls that smelled like coffee and stress, then returning home to review vendor contracts and event timelines until midnight. Martha had been subtly testing my business acumen for months before she made her retirement proposal official. She'd ask my opinion on pricing strategies for peak wedding season, request my input on capital improvements like upgrading the kitchen equipment, and gradually shift more client consultations to my direct oversight. What I initially interpreted as increased responsibility was actually an extended job interview for ownership. The night Martha offered to sell me Wellington Manor, I barely slept. The financial commitment was staggering. Even with her generous terms, I would be personally responsible for a debt that represented more money than my parents had earned in their combined lifetimes. The property insurance alone cost more per month than most people's rent. But Martha had shown me the books, walked me through 5 years of profit and loss statements, and helped me understand that Wellington Manor wasn't just a business. It was a legacy. The previous owners let this place deteriorate for decades before I purchased it, Martha explained, pouring us each a glass of wine from her private collection as snow began falling outside her office windows. I've spent 20 years restoring not just the building, but its reputation. I could sell to developers for twice what I'm offering you, Natasha. They'd tear down the manor and build luxury condominiums with mountain views. The weight of her trust was almost overwhelming. Martha Wellington was offering me the opportunity to preserve something beautiful while building my own future. But she was also gambling her life's work on my ability to succeed where many others had failed. The hospitality industry was notorious for crushing ambitious young entrepreneurs who underestimated the complexity of managing both creative excellence and profitable operations. During the 18 months it took to finalize our ownership transfer, I lived a strange double life. Publicly, I remained Martha's protege, the hardworking assistant who handled logistics while she managed the glamorous client relationships. Privately, I was learning to read profit margins, negotiate insurance policies, manage a staff of 37 employees, and make decisions that affected families' most important celebrations.
The learning curve was steep and unforgiving. I discovered that successful venue ownership required expertise in areas Martha had never mentioned during my apprenticeship. I needed to understand employment law when our head chef quit unexpectedly during peak season. I had to master construction management when we renovated the bridal suite bathrooms. Most challenging of all, I learned to navigate the complex social dynamics of Colorado's elite families, who often viewed their wedding venue selection as a reflection of their social status. My first major test came when the Pemberton family, old Denver money with connections throughout Colorado's political establishment, threatened to cancel their daughter's wedding after a miscommunication about floral arrangements. The bride's mother, accustomed to getting her way through intimidation and social pressure, demanded to speak with Martha directly, refusing to accept that the assistant could resolve her concerns. Martha was visiting her sister in California that week, deliberately absent to force me to handle the crisis independently. I spent 3 hours on the phone with Mrs. Pemberton, then drove to Denver to meet with her personally, bringing portfolio photos of alternative arrangements and a detailed timeline showing how we could accommodate her last-minute changes without affecting other aspects of the celebration. "You're not what I expected," Mrs. Pemberton admitted after I'd successfully addressed all her concerns. "Martha usually handles families like ours personally, but you seem to understand what's important." The wedding proceeded flawlessly, and Mrs. Pemberton later recommended Wellington Manor to 2 other prominent families, specifically requesting that I oversee their events. These small victories built my confidence, but they also highlighted how much I was learning to compartmentalize my professional and personal lives. When Cassie called to share college adventures, or when our parents asked about work during Sunday dinners, I found myself describing a simplified version of my reality. It wasn't intentional deception. Martha and I had signed confidentiality agreements that legally prevented me from discussing our ownership arrangement. But it created a growing disconnect between who I was becoming professionally and how my family perceived my life. The irony was particularly sharp during family conversations about future plans.
Dad would express concern about my lack of direction compared to Cassie's clear career path, while Mom worried that I was limiting myself by focusing so narrowly on event planning. They meant well, but their advice assumed I was still working an entry-level position rather than preparing to own one of Colorado's most successful luxury venues. Meanwhile, I was developing expertise that extended far beyond event planning. I learned to read financial statements like Martha read weather forecasts, quickly and accurately, with an eye toward patterns that predicted future challenges. I studied market trends in the wedding industry, tracked competitor pricing, and developed relationships with vendors who could deliver extraordinary results under impossible deadlines. My business education accelerated when Martha began including me in meetings with her accountant, attorney, and financial advisor. These sessions revealed the sophisticated infrastructure required to operate a legitimate luxury business. I needed to understand tax implications of various business structures, insurance requirements for hosting large events, employment regulations for managing seasonal staff, and building codes that affected our ability to modify the property. Perhaps most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts about people. Wedding planning attracts clients experiencing intense emotional stress, and my ability to read underlying family dynamics often meant the difference between a celebration that strengthened relationships and an event that created lasting resentment. I developed techniques for managing difficult personalities, mediating family conflicts, and maintaining professionalism when clients treated vendors like servants rather than skilled professionals. By the time Martha's ownership transfer became official, I had quietly built expertise that extended far beyond what my family imagined when they thought about my event planning job. I was managing $1 million business, employing dozens of people, and creating experiences that families would remember for generations. But to my parents and sister, I was still just Natasha, the responsible older sister who had found steady work doing something related to weddings. This perception gap would prove significant when Cassie began planning her own wedding and assumed that my connections in the industry meant that I could help her find good deals on flowers and catering, never imagining that I actually owned the venue she had dreamed of booking since we were teenagers. The call came on a Tuesday evening in March, just as I was reviewing vendor contracts for our upcoming spring wedding season. Cassie's voice bubbled through my phone with the kind of breathless excitement I hadn't heard since she'd been accepted to college. "Tasha, you're never going to believe this," she practically sang into the phone. "I'm engaged. Trevor proposed last night at the top of Lookout Mountain, and it was absolutely perfect. The ring is gorgeous, the sunset was incredible, and I just can't stop staring at my hand."
I set down my paperwork immediately, genuinely thrilled for my sister, despite my exhaustion from a 14-hour workday. "Cassie, that's wonderful! Congratulations! Tell me everything. How did he propose? Was it a surprise?" For the next 20 minutes, she regaled me with every detail of Trevor's elaborate proposal, which had apparently involved hiring a photographer to capture the moment, arranging for champagne to be waiting in his car, and coordinating with her best friend to ensure she was wearing the perfect outfit. It was exactly the kind of romantic, Instagram-worthy moment that suited Cassie perfectly. "And the best part," she continued, "is that Trevor's family is incredible. His parents own like half of downtown Denver, and his mother, Patricia, has already offered to help plan everything. She knows all the best vendors and venues in Colorado." I felt a slight unease at this mention of Patricia Ashworth, though I couldn't quite articulate why. The Ashworth name was certainly familiar in Colorado social circles. Trevor's father, Richard Ashworth, owned Ashworth Properties, one of Denver's most successful commercial real estate firms. They were old money, the kind of family that appeared in society pages and hosted charity galas at the Denver Art Museum. "When do I get to meet this amazing fiancé of yours?" I asked, already mentally clearing space in my schedule for whatever celebration dinners and engagement parties would inevitably follow. "Actually, that's perfect timing," Cassie said. "Patricia is hosting an engagement party next weekend at their house in Cherry Hills Village. It's going to be pretty fancy. She's flying in flowers from California and hiring some exclusive caterer.
You'll get to meet everyone important in Trevor's world. The engagement party was held at the Ashworth estate, a sprawling Tudor-style mansion with manicured gardens and a view of the mountains that probably cost more than most people's houses. I arrived wearing my best cocktail dress, a navy blue number I'd purchased for client meetings, and immediately felt underdressed among guests wearing designer gowns and jewelry that caught the light like small spotlights. Trevor himself was exactly what I'd expected based on Cassie's descriptions. Tall, conventionally handsome, with the kind of confident smile that suggested he'd never encountered a problem money couldn't solve. He had perfectly styled brown hair, an expensive watch, and the easy charm of someone who'd attended private schools his entire life. "You must be the famous older sister," Trevor said when Cassie introduced us, his handshake firm but brief. "Cassie's told me so much about you. Working in event planning, right? That must be, interesting." There was something in his tone, not quite condescending, but certainly not impressed, that made me choose my words carefully. "I love what I do," I replied simply. "Creating beautiful experiences for people's most important celebrations is incredibly rewarding." "Oh, that's nice," he said, already looking over my shoulder towards other guests. "Patricia knows all the top planners in Denver. Maybe she could introduce you to some potential clients." Before I could respond, Patricia Ashworth herself appeared at Trevor's elbow. She was an elegant woman in her early 50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the understated jewelry that whispered rather than shouted its value. Her smile was warm, but evaluating, like a jeweler assessing a stone's quality. "This must be Cassandra's sister," Patricia said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Patricia Ashworth. We're so delighted to welcome Cassandra into our family." "Thank you for including me tonight. Your home is absolutely beautiful." "Oh, this old place," Patricia waved dismissively, though her tone suggested she was fishing for compliments. "We've been here 15 years now. Richard insists on keeping the original details, even though I'd love to modernize some of the spaces." As the evening progressed, I found myself observing the dynamics between the families more than participating in conversations. The Ashworth guests were uniformly well-dressed, well-connected, and well-versed in the kind of casual name-dropping that marked Colorado's social elite. They discussed vacation homes in Aspen, children at private colleges, and business deals with the familiarity of people who inhabited the same rarefied world. "David teaches science at the middle school level," I heard Mom explaining to one of Patricia's friends, "and I handle English literature. We're both so proud of our girls." "How wonderful," the woman replied, with the tone people use when they're being polite about something they find unimpressive. "Teaching is such important work." The conversation moved on quickly, leaving my parents slightly stranded in a sea of discussions about stock portfolios and European vacations. I made my way over to rescue them, but not before overhearing Patricia's conversation with another guest about wedding planning. "We're thinking Wellington Manor for the reception," Patricia was saying. "It's absolutely the most exclusive venue in Colorado. Martha Wellington is a personal friend, and she only accepts clients from certain families. The waiting list is usually 2 years, but I'm confident we can arrange something appropriate for Trevor and Cassandra." My stomach dropped. Wellington Manor, my venue, my business, my life's work, was Patricia's first choice for Cassie's wedding. The irony was almost overwhelming. I owned the very venue this woman was name-dropping to impress her friends, yet she was treating me like someone grateful to be included in their social circle. "That sounds lovely," her companion replied. "I've heard Martha Wellington is absolutely impossible to work with unless you have the right connections." "Oh, she is," Patricia agreed with obvious satisfaction. "But the Ashworths have been part of Colorado society for 3 generations. Martha understands the importance of maintaining standards." I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment to process what I'd just learned. Patricia Ashworth was planning to book my venue for Cassie's wedding, assuming her social connections would guarantee preferential treatment from Martha Wellington. She had no idea that the quiet sister she'd barely acknowledged owned the very venue she was using to demonstrate her influence. When I returned to the party, Trevor was regaling a group with stories about his work at his father's company, describing real estate deals with the casual confidence of someone who'd inherited his position rather than earned it. The key to success in commercial real estate, he was explaining, is understanding that relationships matter more than qualifications. It's not what you know, it's who your family knows. Cassie hung on his every word, clearly captivated by his worldliness and sophistication. She looked radiant in her engagement bliss, but I noticed she was quieter than usual, more deferential, as if she was still learning how to fit into this new social stratum. As the evening wound down, Patricia approached me one final time. "Natasha, it was lovely meeting you. I understand you work in event planning. Perhaps you could help Cassandra with some of the smaller details for the wedding. We'll be handling the major vendors ourselves, of course, but I'm sure there are little things you could assist with." Her tone was kind, but unmistakably patronizing, offering me the chance to help with my own sister's wedding like I was a family friend trying to break into the industry. I smiled and nodded, agreeing to help however I could, while privately wondering how this same woman would react when she discovered exactly who she'd been dismissing all evening. The drive home gave me time to consider the complicated position I'd found myself in. Patricia Ashworth wanted to book Wellington Manor for Cassie's wedding, believing her social status would guarantee special treatment from Martha Wellington. Meanwhile, she was treating me like a minor player in the event planning world, someone who might be useful for handling details too small for serious professionals. I had two choices: reveal my ownership of Wellington Manor immediately, or wait and see how this fascinating social dynamic would unfold. Given Patricia's obvious investment in maintaining social hierarchies, I decided the truth might be more impactful if it emerged naturally, rather than through my direct announcement. After all, I'd spent years learning that timing was everything in creating truly memorable experiences. The wedding planning began in earnest 2 weeks after the engagement party, and I quickly discovered that Patricia Ashworth approached event coordination like a military campaign. She had compiled a 3-ring binder with color-coded tabs for every aspect of the celebration, complete with vendor recommendations, budget allocations, and a timeline that extended 18 months into the future. "I've reserved the first Saturday in June at Wellington Manor," Patricia announced during our first official planning meeting, held in the Ashworths' formal dining room. The mahogany table was covered with fabric samples, floral magazines, and printed emails from various vendors. Martha Wellington personally assured me we'd have her full attention for Cassandra's special gay. I nearly choked on my coffee. Martha had indeed booked a June wedding for the Ashworth family, but she'd done so after consulting with me about availability and pricing. What Patricia didn't know was that Martha's full attention actually meant my complete oversight of every detail, since Martha had been gradually stepping back from active event management over the past 6 months. Cassie sat beside Trevor, looking slightly overwhelmed by the sheer volume of decisions spread before us. "Mrs. Ashworth, this is incredible," she said, gesturing at the organized chaos. "I had no idea there were so many details to consider."
"Please, call me Patricia," Trevor's mother replied with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "And don't worry, darling, I've been planning society events for 25 years. With my connections and experience, we'll create something absolutely unforgettable." She turned to me with what I was beginning to recognize as her signature expression, politely condescending interest. "Natasha, I thought you might help us with some of the smaller arrangements. Since you work in the industry, you probably know vendors who handle things like transportation and guest accommodations. Nothing too complex, of course." I nodded agreeably, making notes in my own planner while privately calculating that the smaller arrangements she was describing actually represented about 40% of the total event coordination. "I'd be happy to help with whatever you need."
The next 2 hours revealed Patricia's vision for what she repeatedly called a wedding worthy of the Ashworth name. She had connections at Denver's most exclusive florists, relationships with caterers who served the city's political elite, and opinions about everything from invitation paperweight to the appropriate number of courses for the reception dinner. The guest list will be approximately 400 people, Patricia explained, consulting her master spreadsheet. Trevor's father's business associates, our family friends, members of the country club, and of course, Cassandra's family and college friends. I watched my sister's face as Patricia casually mentioned 400 guests. Cassie had always dreamed of an intimate wedding with close family and friends, maybe 80 people maximum, but she simply nodded and smiled, apparently adjusting her expectations to match her new reality. 400 sounds perfect, Cassie said quietly. Although I should mention that my family's guest list might be smaller than you're expecting, we're not really connected to Denver's social scene the way you are. Oh, that's perfectly fine, dear, Patricia replied with the tone people use when discussing minor inconveniences. We'll simply invite more of our family friends to ensure the reception feels appropriately festive. Empty tables at a wedding create such an unfortunate impression. Trevor reached over to squeeze Cassie's hand. Don't worry, babe. Mom's events are legendary. Everyone who matters in Denver will want to celebrate with us. As the meeting progressed, I began to understand the subtle ways Patricia was reshaping my sister's wedding vision to match Ashworth family expectations. Cassie had mentioned loving peonies during our childhood conversations about dream weddings, but Patricia had already arranged for imported orchids because they were more sophisticated for an evening affair. My sister had expressed interest in a small string quartet, but Patricia was coordinating with the Denver Symphony's chamber ensemble because music sets the tone for the entire celebration. Now, about the bridal party, Patricia continued, flipping to another tabbed section of her binder. Trevor has 6 groomsmen, all from the best families in Colorado. For balance, we'll need 6 bridesmaids. Cassie looked troubled. I was hoping to keep it smaller, just my maid of honor and maybe 2 close friends from college. Nonsense, Patricia waved dismissively. The photographs will look unbalanced with uneven numbers. Besides, I have several suggestions for additional bridesmaids, daughters of family friends who would be honored to participate. I watched my sister's face carefully, seeing her struggle between asserting her own preferences and accommodating her future mother-in-law's expectations. I suppose we could expand the bridal party, Cassie said finally, as long as Natasha is my maid of honor. That's non-negotiable. Patricia's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. Of course, Cassandra, though I should mention that Trevor's cousin Rebecca would traditionally hold that position, given family protocol. Perhaps Natasha could be a bridesmaid instead. Rebecca has experience with formal events. Her own wedding was featured in Colorado Homes and Lifestyles magazine. The silence that followed was deafening. Cassie's face had gone pale, and Trevor was studying his hands rather than meeting anyone's eyes. I felt something cold settle in my stomach as I realized Patricia was systematically removing me from central roles in my own sister's wedding. I appreciate the suggestion, Cassie said with more firmness than I'd heard from her all afternoon. But Natasha is my sister and my best friend. She'll be my maid of honor. Patricia's expression remained pleasant, but I caught the flash of annoyance in her eyes. Of course, dear, I was simply thinking about photographs and family traditions, but it's your day, naturally. The remainder of the meeting focused on vendor selections, all of which Patricia had apparently prearranged based on her extensive network of preferred suppliers. As she distributed business cards and contact information, I realized I was being systematically excluded from meaningful planning decisions while being assigned the time-consuming logistical work. Natasha, if you could handle the hotel room blocks for out-of-town guests, that would be wonderful. And perhaps coordinate the transportation between the ceremony and the reception. Nothing too complicated, of course, but these details matter for guest experience.
What she didn't realize was that coordinating guest accommodations and transportation for a 400-person wedding was actually an enormously complex logistical undertaking that required negotiating group rates, managing multiple arrival and departure schedules, and creating contingency plans for various transportation scenarios. As we prepared to leave, Patricia made one final comment that crystallized everything I had been observing. Natasha, I hope you understand that this level of event requires vendors with established reputations in Denver's social scene. I'm sure your connections are lovely for smaller celebrations, but the Ashworth name demands a certain caliber of service. She handed me her business card with a gentle smile. If you're ever interested in expanding your client base, I'd be happy to introduce you to some entry-level opportunities. Everyone has to start somewhere. The drive home with Cassie was uncomfortably quiet. My sister stared out the passenger window, occasionally sighing as she processed everything that had just happened. "She means well," Cassie said finally, though her voice lacked conviction. "Patricia's just used to managing large events. She wants everything to be perfect." "And what do you want?" I asked carefully. Cassie was quiet for several minutes before answering. "I want Trevor to be happy. I want his family to accept me. And I want you to understand that this world is new for me. I'm still learning how things work with families like the Ashworths." What troubled me wasn't Patricia's social maneuvering or her obvious belief that her connections made her superior to everyone else in the room. What bothered me was watching my confident, vibrant sister gradually diminish herself to fit into someone else's expectations, apologizing for her family's modest background and accepting treatment that subtly reinforced her position as an outsider grateful to be included. But Patricia Ashworth had made one critical miscalculation in her assessment of the Hartwell family dynamics. She had assumed that the quiet sister who worked in event planning was someone she could safely dismiss and condescend to without consequences. She was about to discover exactly how wrong that assumption was. 3 weeks after the initial planning meeting, my carefully maintained double life began converging in ways I hadn't anticipated. Martha's gradual retirement had accelerated due to her arthritis, leaving me to handle increasingly complex client relationships while maintaining the fiction that I was simply her protege rather than Wellington Manor's actual owner. The morning everything changed started ordinarily enough. I arrived at the venue before sunrise, as had become my habit, to review setup requirements for a corporate retreat we were hosting that weekend. The early morning hours were precious to me. Quiet time to walk through our spaces, check equipment, and mentally prepare for whatever challenges the day might bring. Wellington Manor looked particularly beautiful in the soft dawn light. The Victorian architecture seemed to glow against the backdrop of snow-capped mountains, and I felt the familiar surge of pride and responsibility that came with owning something so historically significant. The previous owners had let the property deteriorate for decades before Martha purchased it, and her restoration work had been meticulous. Now it was my responsibility to preserve both the building and its reputation for future generations. I was reviewing catering prep schedules in my office when my assistant knocked with an urgent message. "Natasha, Martha's attorney is on line 1. He says it's about the final ownership documents." The call was brief but significant. All legal paperwork had been completed, insurance policies transferred, and business licenses updated. As of that morning, I was officially the sole owner of Wellington Manor, no longer operating under Martha's supervision or approval. The transition we'd spent 2 years orchestrating was finally complete. "Congratulations, Miss Hartwell," Martha's attorney said warmly. "You're now the youngest venue owner in Wellington Manor's 100-year history. Martha specifically asked me to tell you how proud she is of what you've accomplished." After hanging up, I sat in my office, truly my office now, processing the magnitude of what just happened. At 29, I owned a business that employed 37 people, generated over $2 million in annual revenue, and hosted celebrations for Colorado's most prominent families. The scared girl who had started as Martha's apprentice 3 years ago had evolved into something I was still learning to recognize. My reflection was interrupted by another call, this one from Patricia Ashworth. Her voice carried the particular combination of urgency and authority I'd learned to associate with crisis management. Natasha, I need your help with a disaster, Patricia began without preamble. The florist I arranged for Cassandra's wedding just informed me they're overbooked for our date. Apparently, they accepted another client the same weekend, some tech millionaire's daughter who's paying obscene amounts for an elaborate garden party. I pulled up our vendor files while she continued her explanation. Patricia had chosen Pemberton and Associates, one of Denver's most exclusive floral designers, but they were notorious for double-booking high-profile events and then selecting clients based on who offered the most money or social influence.
I've called everyone in my network, Patricia continued, but June is peak wedding season and every reputable florist is already committed. I was hoping you might know someone who could handle arrangements for 400 guests on short notice. The irony was delicious. Patricia was asking me to solve a problem using the very industry connections she'd dismissed as suitable only for smaller celebrations. What she didn't know was that Wellington Manor maintained exclusive partnerships with several premier vendors who reserve capacity specifically for our events. I might be able to help, I said carefully. Let me make some calls and see what options are available. Oh, would you? That would be wonderful, Patricia replied, relief evident in her voice. I have to admit, I'm impressed by your connections. Perhaps I underestimated your network in the industry. After hanging up, I contacted Alessandro Benedetti, whose floral studio had worked with Wellington Manor for over a decade. Alessandro was temperamental, expensive, and absolutely brilliant, the kind of artist who created installations rather than simple arrangements. He typically booked weddings 2 years in advance, but he owed me several favors after I had helped him through a difficult divorce by recommending Wellington Manor for his ex-wife's remarriage ceremony. Natasha, darling, Alessandra's accented voice carried obvious affection. How can I help the woman who saved my sanity last year? I explained the situation without mentioning that the bride was my sister or that the demanding client was Patricia Ashworth. Alessandra had worked with enough difficult mothers of the bride to understand the dynamics immediately. June is impossible, you know this, he said with theatrical exasperation. But for you, for Wellington Manor, perhaps I can rearrange some schedules. What kind of budget are we discussing? When I mentioned the Ashworth name and their expected level of luxury, Alessandro's tone shifted from reluctant to intrigued. Ah, the Ashworths. Yes, I know their reputation. This would be significant for my portfolio. Very well, I will create something spectacular, but I want creative control, no micromanaging from the mother. That might be challenging, I warned him. Patricia Ashworth has very specific opinions about everything. Then she can find another florist, Alessandra replied firmly. I am an artist, not a decorator. If she wants my work, she accepts my vision. I spent the next 2 hours negotiating a compromise that would satisfy both Alessandro's artistic integrity and Patricia's need for control. The solution involved creating detailed design presentations that would allow Patricia to provide input while preserving Alessandro's creative authority over execution. When I called Patricia back with the good news, her response was more revealing than she probably intended. Alessandro Benedetti agreed to take the booking? She sounded genuinely shocked. I've been trying to get on his client list for 3 years. His work is extraordinary, but he's notoriously selective about projects. He had a cancellation, I replied diplomatically, not mentioning that the cancellation was actually a favor specifically for Wellington Manor. Natasha, I have to ask, what exactly is your position in the event planning industry? Because booking Alessandro Benedetti on 3 weeks' notice suggests connections I didn't realize you possessed. The question hung in the air like a challenge. I could feel Patricia reassessing everything she thought she knew about me, trying to reconcile her assumptions about the helpful sister with evidence that I wielded significant influence in her social sphere. I've been fortunate to develop good relationships with vendors over the years. Working closely with Martha Wellington has opened doors that might otherwise remain closed.
It wasn't technically a lie, but it wasn't the complete truth either. Patricia's relief was palpable, though I detected a new note of curiosity in her voice. Well, I'm certainly grateful for your connections. Perhaps we should discuss expanding your role in the wedding planning. If you have relationships with other premium vendors, your input might be more valuable than I initially realized. Over the following days, Patricia's attitude toward me shifted subtly, but noticeably. She began copying me on email communications with other vendors, asking my opinion about menu selections, and treating my suggestions with newfound respect. What she didn't realize was that many of the vendors she was contacting had been working with Wellington Manor for years and knew me as the venue owner, not Martha's assistant. The caterer she had selected, Pierre Dubois, called me directly after receiving Patricia's initial inquiry. "Natasha, I received a booking request for the Ashworth wedding at Wellington Manor. Shall I proceed with standard pricing, or is this a special arrangement?" Pierre had been our exclusive catering partner for 18 months, and his events at Wellington Manor consistently received rave reviews from guests and industry publications. What Patricia didn't know was that Pierre offered Wellington Manor preferential scheduling and pricing because our partnership had been instrumental in building his reputation among Colorado's elite.
Of course. And Natasha, the mother called me yesterday asking about my relationship with Martha Wellington. She seemed surprised that I was willing to adjust my schedule for this booking. Patricia was clearly conducting her own investigation into how I had managed to secure vendors she considered impossible to book. Each successful arrangement was challenging her assumptions about my position in the industry, though she hadn't yet connected the dots to the obvious conclusion. The breakthrough came during a menu tasting at Pierre's studio the following week. Patricia, Trevor, Cassie, and I gathered around Pierre's demonstration kitchen while he presented options for the reception dinner. Everything was proceeding smoothly until Pierre mentioned a dietary accommodation that required special preparation. "Of course, Natasha," Pierre said without thinking. "We handled similar requirements for the Morrison celebration last month. I'll use the same protocols we've established at Wellington Manor." Patricia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "You work regularly at Wellington Manor?" "Exclusively," Pierre replied proudly. "We've been Wellington Manor's preferred caterer for over a year now. Natasha and I have developed quite an efficient partnership." The silence that followed was electric. I could practically see Patricia's mind racing, trying to understand how Martha Wellington's assistant had developed an exclusive partnership with one of Denver's most sought-after caterers. "I wasn't aware Martha Wellington worked so closely with outside event planners," Patricia said carefully, her eyes fixed on me. "Oh, Natasha isn't an outside planner," Pierre replied innocently. She's been invaluable in coordinating vendor relationships," I interrupted quickly, shooting Pierre a warning look he immediately understood. But the damage was done. Patricia had heard enough to realize that my role at Wellington Manor was far more significant than I'd led her to believe. The question was whether she would push for complete clarity or continue operating on assumptions that were becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. As we prepared to leave the tasting, Patricia linked her arm through mine with newfound warmth. "Natasha, I think you and I need to have a private conversation soon. I'm beginning to suspect there's much more to your story than you've shared." The careful balance I'd maintained for months was finally shifting, and I wasn't entirely sure whether the truth would strengthen my position or create complications I wasn't prepared to handle. The private conversation Patricia had requested came sooner than I expected, though not in the way either of us had planned. 2 days after the catering tasting, she called requesting an emergency meeting about what she described as a significant complication with the venue booking. "Can you meet me at Wellington Manor this afternoon?" Patricia asked, her voice carrying an edge of anxiety I hadn't heard before. "There's been a misunderstanding with Martha Wellington, and I need someone with your vendor connections to help resolve it." I agreed to meet her at 3 o'clock, privately amused that Patricia was asking me to intervene with myself. When I arrived at Wellington Manor that afternoon, I found Patricia's Mercedes already parked in our circular drive. She was standing on the front steps, looking uncharacteristically flustered as she spoke rapidly into her phone. No, Richard, I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation. Wellington Manor is the venue for Cassandra's wedding. There isn't a backup option that maintains our social standing. I waited until she finished her call before greeting her. Patricia, what seems to be the problem? Her composure cracked slightly as she explained the situation. Martha Wellington called this morning to inform me she's retiring immediately due to health concerns. Apparently, she's transferring ownership of Wellington Manor to some young woman I've never heard of, and this new owner wants to review all existing bookings before honoring previous commitments. My heart rate accelerated. Martha must have finally made the ownership transfer public without warning me first. Did she mention the new owner's name? Natasha something, Patricia replied dismissively. Probably some relative of Martha's who doesn't understand the importance of maintaining established client relationships. I was hoping you might be able to speak with her, given your industry connections. The moment had arrived with startling suddenness. I could continue the charade, pretending to negotiate with myself through phone calls and meetings, or I could reveal the truth that would fundamentally alter every assumption Patricia had made about me and my family. Patricia, I said carefully, there's something important I need to tell you about Wellington Manor's new ownership. Before I could continue, the front door opened and my venue coordinator, Jessica, appeared with a clipboard and her usual efficient smile. Natasha, perfect timing. The new linens arrived for the Pemberton anniversary celebration, and I need your approval on the setup. Jessica's casual familiarity with me, combined with her obvious expectation that I would approve venue decisions, created a moment of crystalline clarity for Patricia. I watched her expression shift from confusion to comprehension to something approaching shock.
"You're Natasha," she said slowly. "You're the new owner Martha was referring to." There was no point in denying the obvious any longer. "Yes. I've owned Wellington Manor for the past 6 months, though Martha remained as the public face during our transition period." Patricia stared at me for several long seconds, processing the implications of this revelation. "You've owned Wellington Manor for 6 months, during which time you've been planning my son's wedding. At your own venue?" "Yes." "And you never mentioned this because—" The question was fair, though complicated to answer honestly. Initially, because Martha and I had confidentiality agreements during the ownership transfer. Later, because you seemed to have very specific assumptions about my role in the industry, and I was curious to see how they would play out. Patricia's face cycled through several emotions: embarrassment, anger, calculation, and finally something resembling grudging respect. "You allowed me to patronize you about your little event planning business, while you actually owned the most exclusive venue in Colorado? You patronized me because you assumed someone from my background couldn't possibly have achieved anything significant," I replied evenly. "I simply chose not to correct that assumption immediately." She was quiet for several minutes, clearly recalibrating everything she thought she knew about the Hartwell family dynamic. When she finally spoke, her tone had shifted completely. "I owe you an apology, Natasha, and probably an explanation." She gestured toward the venue entrance. "May we go inside? I think this conversation requires privacy." I led her into Wellington Manor's main parlor, the elegant space where I held consultations with prospective clients. Patricia took in the restored Victorian details, the carefully curated artwork, and the overall atmosphere of understated luxury with new appreciation. "This is your domain," she said, settling into one of the antique chairs. "You weren't just helping plan Cassandra's wedding, you were allowing me to book your venue while treating you like hired help." Something like that. Patricia was quiet for another long moment before continuing. "I need to be honest about something. When Trevor first brought Cassandra home, I was concerned about the differences in your family's backgrounds. Not because there's anything wrong with being middle-class teachers," she added quickly, "but because social transitions can be challenging, and I wanted to protect my son from potential complications." I remained silent, allowing her to work through her explanation. What I failed to recognize was that my concern about social compatibility was blinding me to individual merit.
I saw what I expected to see rather than what was actually in front of me. She paused, then added with obvious discomfort, I've been guilty of the exact kind of prejudice I claim to deplore. The admission was more honest than I expected from someone with Patricia's social position. I appreciate your candor. There's more, she continued. I need to ask about the wedding booking. Now that I know you own Wellington Manor, I'm concerned about potential conflicts of interest. Are you planning to honor our original agreement? The question revealed Patricia's continued misunderstanding of my character, though I suppose her concern was reasonable, given the circumstances. Of course, I'm honoring the booking. Wellington Manor has never canceled a confirmed event for personal reasons. Relief flooded Patricia's face. Thank you. Though I have to ask, given how I've treated you, why would you still want to host Cassandra's wedding? Because it's my sister's wedding. And because Wellington Manor's reputation is built on creating perfect celebrations regardless of personal complications. She nodded slowly. There's something else we need to discuss, the financial arrangements. I negotiated pricing based on Martha Wellington's quotes. But if you're the actual owner, the pricing remains as quoted, though I should mention that several of the vendor arrangements I secured for you, including Alessandra's floral work and Pierre's catering, were possible because of Wellington Manor's established partnerships. You weren't just benefiting from my industry connections, you were accessing services I've built professional relationships to provide. The full scope of her misunderstanding was finally becoming clear to Patricia. The hotel accommodations, the transportation coordination, the vendor scheduling. You weren't handling the smaller details for my convenience. You are managing complex logistics because you have the expertise and relationships to execute them flawlessly. Yes. She was quiet for several minutes, processing the complete reversal of her assumptions. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried a note of genuine curiosity. How long have you been planning to reveal your ownership? Originally, I thought it might come out naturally during vendor meetings or setup discussions. When that didn't happen, I became interested in understanding how long the misconception could persist. And what did you learn from your little social experiment?
The question carried a slight edge, but I sensed genuine interest rather than hostility. That people often see what they expect to see, regardless of evidence to the contrary, and that assumptions about social class can create blind spots that persist even when contradictory information is readily available. Patricia considered this for several moments. Fair enough, though I suspect you also learned that you enjoy having power over people who underestimate you. She wasn't entirely wrong, though I wasn't ready to admit that level of personal satisfaction in the situation. Perhaps. Well, Patricia said, rising from her chair with renewed composure, this certainly complicates our working relationship, though I suppose it also clarifies it. You're not just Cassandra's helpful sister, you're the venue owner, and I'm your client. We can maintain whatever dynamic feels most comfortable for everyone involved, I offered diplomatically. No, I think clarity serves everyone better. Patricia's tone had shifted to something more businesslike, but also more respectful. I'd like to start over, if that's possible. Patricia Ashworth, mother of the groom, requesting the services of Wellington Manor for my son's wedding to your sister. I stood and extended my hand formally. Natasha Hartwell, owner of Wellington Manor, pleased to host your family's celebration. As we shook hands, I realized that this moment of truth might actually improve rather than complicate our working relationship. Patricia was many things, snobbish, status-conscious, occasionally condescending, but she wasn't stupid. Now that she understood who she was actually dealing with, our interactions could proceed with appropriate mutual respect. The question was how this revelation would affect the broader family dynamics, particularly Cassie's position in a world where her unsuccessful sister had just been revealed as one of Colorado's youngest venue owners. That conversation, I suspected, would prove even more interesting than this one. The revelation of my ownership created an immediate shift in wedding planning dynamics that none of us were entirely prepared to navigate.
Patricia, to her credit, threw herself into damage control with the same efficiency she applied to social climbing. Within 24 hours of our conversation at Wellington Manor, she had called an emergency family meeting to recalibrate our approach to the celebration. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday morning at the Ashworth estate, ostensibly to review final details, but actually to address the elephant that had suddenly appeared in their perfectly appointed room. I arrived to find Trevor pacing the length of their marble foyer, while Cassie sat in the living room looking shock-shelled, still processing the news Patricia had delivered the night before. "Natasha!" Trevor's greeting carried forced enthusiasm as he intercepted me at the door. "Mom told us about Wellington Manor. Congratulations on your business success. We had no idea you were operating at that level in the industry." His handshake lingered a beat too long, and I could practically see him mentally recalculating my position in his social hierarchy. The helpful sister-in-law had suddenly become a business owner whose venue was featured regularly in Colorado's luxury lifestyle magazines. Patricia appeared with coffee service arranged on a silver tray, her movements carrying the careful precision of someone determined to demonstrate proper etiquette. "Natasha, I hope you'll forgive yesterday's confusion. I should have realized that someone with your obvious expertise couldn't possibly be working in an entry-level position." The apology was gracious, but revisionist, transforming her previous condescension into a simple misunderstanding rather than acknowledging the social prejudices that had shaped her assumptions. I accepted it diplomatically, understanding that Patricia needed to preserve her self-image while adjusting to new realities. Cassie remained unusually quiet throughout these exchanges, watching our interactions with an expression I couldn't quite read. When we finally settled around the dining table to review wedding logistics, she spoke for the first time since I'd arrived. "I need to understand something," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "How long have you owned Wellington Manor, Tasha?" "The ownership transfer was finalized 6 months ago, but I've been operating as the de facto manager for over a year before that." "So, when I got engaged and started talking about dream venues, you already knew you owned the place I'd always wanted to get married at?" The hurt in her voice was unmistakable. I had been so focused on the social dynamics with Patricia that I hadn't fully considered how my secret would affect my relationship with Cassie. "Yes," I admitted. "But Martha and I had confidentiality agreements that prevented me from discussing the ownership change until all legal matters were resolved." "Legal matters were resolved 6 months ago," Cassie pointed out. "We've been planning this wedding for 3 months. When exactly were you planning to mention that I'm getting married at my sister's venue?" Trevor and Patricia exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the family tension emerging at their dining table. Patricia attempted to smooth things over with characteristic efficiency.
"Perhaps we should focus on the positive aspects of this development," she suggested. "Having Natasha as the venue owner ensures we'll receive exceptional service and attention to detail." "That's not the point, Mrs. Ashworth," Cassie replied, her eyes still fixed on me. "The point is that my sister let me believe I was planning my dream wedding when actually she was just, what? Watching me fumble through vendor selections she could have arranged with a phone call." The accusation stung because it contained elements of truth I wasn't proud of. "Cassie, it wasn't like that. I wanted to help, but the situation was complicated by what? By letting Trevor's family treat you like hired help while you secretly owned the most exclusive venue in Colorado?" Cassie's composure was beginning to crack. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I've been defending my family's modest background to Patricia for months, apologizing for our limitations, when actually my sister is more successful than anyone at this table." The silence that followed was deafening. Trevor stared at his coffee cup, while Patricia examined her manicured hands, both clearly wishing they were anywhere else. But Cassie wasn't finished. "And another thing," she continued, her voice rising slightly, "you let me feel grateful for Patricia's vendor connections, when actually you could have arranged everything through your own professional relationships.
I've been playing the role of the grateful outsider, thankful to be included in their sophisticated world, when my own sister had more industry influence than all of Patricia's country club contacts combined. Cassandra, Patricia interjected gently, perhaps we should... No, I need to say this. I've spent months feeling inadequate, worried that my family wasn't good enough for the Ashworth social circle. I've apologized for my parents' teaching careers, downplayed my own background, and accepted condescending treatment because I thought we were lucky to be included. She turned back to me, tears now visible in her eyes. The whole time. You knew I was diminishing myself unnecessarily. You watched me struggle with feelings of inferiority when you could have prevented it with one conversation about your actual career achievements. The weight of her words settled over me like a physical presence. In my fascination with social dynamics and my curiosity about Patricia's assumptions, I had lost sight of how my secret was affecting the person who mattered most to me. "You're right," I said quietly. "I should have told you the truth months ago. I was so caught up in maintaining confidentiality agreements and managing transitions in business that I didn't consider how my silence was impacting your experience. But why? Why would you want to watch me struggle when you could have helped?" The question forced me to confront motivations I hadn't fully acknowledged even to myself. Honestly, part of it was business necessity. The confidentiality agreements were legally binding. But part of it was also curiosity about how Patricia's assumptions would play out. I wanted to see how long someone could maintain prejudices in the face of contradictory evidence. "So you were part of your social experiment." "Not intentionally, but I can see how it feels that way, and I'm sorry." Trevor finally found his voice. "For what it's worth, Cassie, I think this actually improves everything. Having Natasha own the venue means our wedding will be perfect. He has every incentive to make sure we have an incredible celebration." "That's the exact wrong point, Trevor," Cassie replied sharply. "This isn't about vendor quality or wedding logistics. This is about my sister letting me believe I wasn't good enough when she knew better." Patricia, sensing an opportunity to demonstrate her evolved perspective, addressed Cassie directly. "If I may, Cassandra, I think Natasha's discretion was actually quite professional. Business owners often maintain confidentiality about transitions to preserve client relationships and market stability." "Thank you, Patricia, but this isn't about business ethics. This is about family honesty." The conversation continued for another hour, with each of us attempting to process the implications of the revelation from our different perspectives. Patricia was focused on social recalibration, Trevor on ensuring wedding quality, and Cassie on the emotional betrayal she felt from my extended silence. By the time we concluded the meeting, several things had been established. The wedding would proceed as planned at Wellington Manor. Patricia would adjust her approach to family dynamics based on updated information about the Hartwell sisters' respective achievements, and Cassie needed time to work through her feelings about my deception. As we prepared to leave, Patricia pulled me aside for a private word. "Natasha, I hope you'll be patient with Cassie's reaction. She's not actually angry about your success. She's hurt that you didn't trust her enough to share it. I know. I made the wrong choice, prioritizing business considerations over family relationships."
Perhaps, Patricia agreed, though I should mention that your restraint in not correcting my assumptions probably taught me something important about my own biases. Not that family dynamics should be sacrificed for social lessons, she added quickly. The drive home with Cassie was tense and largely silent. As I dropped her off at her apartment, she finally spoke. "I need some time to think about all this, Tasha. I'm happy for your success, really, I am. But I'm also hurt that you let me feel insecure when you could have prevented it. I understand. Take whatever time you need. The wedding is still 3 weeks away," she said as she got out of the car. "We'll need to figure out how to work together professionally, even if we're struggling personally." As I watched her walk into her building, I realized that my social experiment had succeeded in revealing Patricia's prejudices, but had cost me something far more valuable: my sister's trust at one of the most important moments of her life. The question now was whether 3 weeks was enough time to repair the damage I had inadvertently caused,
while trying to prove a point about social assumptions and family worth. The 3 weeks following our family confrontation passed in a strange professional limbo. Cassie and I maintained necessary communication about wedding details, while carefully avoiding deeper conversations about trust, family dynamics, or the emotional fallout from my extended deception. She responded to my texts about vendor confirmations and timeline adjustments with efficient politeness, but the easy, sisterly warmth that had always characterized our relationship remained noticeably absent. Patricia, meanwhile, had undergone a complete transformation in her approach to wedding planning. Where she had previously dismissed my input or relegated me to minor logistics, she now deferred to my expertise on every significant decision. The change was so dramatic that it felt almost performative, as if she was overcompensating for months of condescending treatment by treating me like an infallible authority on all matters related to event planning. "Natasha, what's your professional opinion on the ceremony seating arrangement?" became her standard opening for conversations that previously would have begun with her announcing decisions she'd already made. "I want to ensure we're following best practices for venue flow and guest experience." The irony wasn't lost on me that Patricia's newfound respect for my expertise was creating almost as much distance between us as her previous dismissiveness had. She was now so careful to acknowledge my authority that our interactions felt stilted and artificial, lacking the natural rhythm that develops between people who genuinely understand each other. 2 days before the wedding, during our final venue walkthrough, the accumulated tension finally reached a breaking point. We were reviewing ceremony setup in Wellington Manor's garden when a seemingly minor disagreement about processional timing triggered a much larger confrontation. "I still think we need more time between the bridesmaid's entrance and Cassandra's," Patricia was saying, consulting her detailed timeline. 30 seconds feels rushed for a formal ceremony." 30 seconds is standard, I replied, perhaps more curtly than necessary. "Longer pauses feel awkward and create dead air that makes guests uncomfortable." "But surely, for a wedding of this significance," Patricia began. "Patricia," I interrupted, "we hired Wellington Manor because of our expertise in creating flawless celebrations. Please, trust that expertise." The sharpness in my voice was born from weeks of managing everyone else's emotional responses to my revelation while suppressing my own frustration with the situation. Patricia's excessive deference was almost as exhausting as her previous condescension, and I was tired of walking on eggshells around everyone in my own family. Patricia fell silent, clearly taken aback by my tone. From across the garden, where she had been reviewing floral placement with Alessandro, Cassie looked up at the sound of raised voices. "Is everything all right?" Cassie asked, approaching our group with obvious concern. "Fine," I replied tersely. "Just finalizing processional timing." But Cassie wasn't fooled by my dismissive response. She studied my face with the perceptive attention that only siblings possess, reading stress signals that I thought I'd been hiding successfully. "Actually, can everyone give us a few minutes?" Cassie said, addressing the small group of vendors and coordinators who had been pretending not to notice the tension. "Patricia, would you mind checking on the catering setup? I need to speak with Natasha privately." As the others dispersed, leaving us alone in the garden where dozens of couples had exchanged vows over the past century, Cassie settled on one of the stone benches that overlooked the mountain vista. "Sit," she commanded, patting the space beside her. "We need to talk." I joined her reluctantly, not entirely ready for whatever conversation she had in mind.
"You look terrible," Cassie said without preamble. "When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" The unexpected concern in her voice almost undid my carefully maintained composure. "I'm fine, Cassie. Wedding week is always stressful." "This isn't about wedding stress, and we both know it," she replied. "You've been carrying guilt about the whole ownership revelation for 3 weeks, and it's eating you alive." I started to protest, but she held up a hand to stop me. "I've been angry with you," she continued, "and I think I had a right to be. But watching you torture yourself over this is making me realize that maybe I've been focusing on the wrong things." "What do you mean?" Cassie was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I've been hurt that you didn't trust me with the truth about Wellington Manor. But I've been thinking about why you might have kept it secret. And I don't think it was really about confidentiality agreements or social experiments."
She turned to face me directly. I think you've been protecting me my whole life, taking care of details and solving problems without making me feel indebted or inadequate. And this situation, owning my dream venue, having connections to all the vendors I needed, it was just another version of that same impulse. The accuracy of her observation caught me off guard. Cassie, she didn't want you to feel like you owed me my perfect wedding. You wanted me to feel like I had earned it myself, even if you were quietly making it all possible behind the scenes. Tears I'd been suppressing for weeks finally began to fall. I never wanted you to feel diminished by my success, but I also didn't want you to feel like your wedding was just charity from your more successful sister. Oh, Tasha, Cassie said, pulling me into the kind of fierce hug we'd shared as children when one of us was hurt. Don't you understand? Having a sister who's successful enough to own Wellington Manor doesn't diminish me. It makes me proud. I don't want to be protected from your achievements. I want to celebrate them. We sat together in the garden as the sun continued its descent behind the mountains, both of us crying and talking through months of accumulated misunderstandings and unexpressed feelings. I'm sorry I made you feel like you couldn't share your success with your own family, Cassie said. And I'm sorry Patricia made you feel like you had to prove something about your worth. I'm sorry I let you struggle with feelings of inadequacy when I could have prevented them. And I'm sorry I prioritized everyone else's reactions over honesty with you. We're quite a pair, Cassie said with a watery laugh, both trying so hard to protect each other that we ended up hurting each other instead. As we talked, Patricia appeared at the garden entrance, curiously uncertain whether to interrupt our emotional conversation. Cassie waved her over with a gesture that included rather than excluded her from our family moment. Patricia, I owe you an apology too, Cassie said as Trevor's mother approached cautiously. I've been taking my frustration about the ownership revelation on you, when actually you've been trying to adapt to new information as gracefully as possible. Patricia looked genuinely surprised by the apology. Cassandra, you don't owe me anything. If anything, I owe you both an explanation for my initial assumptions about your family's background. We all made assumptions, I said. The difference is that some of us had information that could have corrected those assumptions earlier. Well, Patricia said, settling onto the bench across from us, perhaps we can agree that this experience has been educational for everyone involved. I've certainly learned not to underestimate people based on their family backgrounds or perceived social status. Trevor appeared at the garden entrance, drawn by the sight of 3 important women in his life having what appeared to be a serious conversation. Everything okay out here? You all look like you've been crying. We're fine, Cassie assured him. Just working through some family dynamics before tomorrow. Good timing, Trevor said with obvious relief, because I have something I need to say to Natasha. He approached our group with the kind of determined expression that suggested he'd been rehearsing his words. I owe you an apology for how I reacted when we learned about Wellington Manor. I was so focused on what your success meant for our wedding that I didn't consider what our family's treatment of you must have felt like. The apology was unexpected and seemed genuine. Thank you, Trevor. That means a lot. I also want you to know that having you as a sister-in-law, a successful, accomplished sister-in-law, makes me proud to be joining your family.
As we gathered ourselves to head back inside for final preparations, I realized that the crisis I'd been dreading had actually created an opportunity for deeper honesty and understanding between all of us. The revelation of my ownership had forced conversations that needed to happen, cleared the air of assumptions that had been limiting our relationships, and established new foundations based on mutual respect rather than social hierarchy. Tomorrow, Cassie would walk down the aisle at the venue I owned, marry into a family that now understood and valued both our backgrounds, and begin her married life with all cards on the table rather than hidden beneath polite social conventions. For the first time in weeks, I felt like the wedding was going to be truly perfect. Not because everything would go according to plan, but because it would be celebrating authentic relationships built on honest foundations. The morning of Cassie's wedding dawned with the kind of perfect Colorado weather that made Wellington Manor look like something from a fairy tale. Clear mountain air, brilliant sunshine, and temperatures that promised comfortable celebration both indoors and out. As I walked through the venue at sunrise, conducting my final inspection, I felt the familiar mixture of pride and nervous energy that accompanied every major event, amplified by the personal significance of this particular celebration.
My staff had arrived early, moving with the practiced efficiency of a team that had orchestrated hundreds of perfect days. Jessica coordinated with Alessandro's crew as they installed the elaborate floral arrangements that had exceeded even Patricia's ambitious expectations. The kitchen hummed with Pierre's careful orchestration of a 7-course dinner service for 400 guests. Every detail reflected the highest standards Wellington Manor was known for. But today, those standards carried the additional weight of family expectations and personal relationships. At 8 a.m., our bridal suite filled with the cheerful chaos of wedding day preparations. Cassie had arrived with her bridesmaids, hair and makeup artists, and enough luggage to outfit a small boutique. The energy was infectious, that unique combination of excitement, nervous anticipation, and pure joy that characterized the best wedding mornings. "Natasha!" Cassie called as I entered to check on their progress. "Come see how amazing everything looks." She was seated at the antique vanity I'd had restored specifically for bridal preparations, surrounded by the tools and products that would transform her from my little sister into a radiant bride. Her hair was half finished in an elegant updo that would complement the cathedral veil our grandmother had worn, and her makeup artist was applying the kind of subtle enhancement that would look flawless in photographs while maintaining Cassie's natural beauty. "You look absolutely beautiful," I said, and meant it. There was something luminous about Cassie that morning, not just the professional styling, but an inner radiance that spoke to genuine happiness and excitement about the future she was choosing. "I feel beautiful," she replied, meeting my eyes in the mirror. "And I feel grateful, not just for this incredible venue or the perfect vendors, but for having a sister who made all this possible." Rebecca Ashworth, Trevor's cousin who had ultimately become a bridesmaid rather than maid of honor, looked up from where she was arranging Cassie's jewelry. "I have to say, having your sister own the venue is the ultimate wedding convenience. No vendor coordination stress, no worrying about timeline conflicts, just perfect service guaranteed." "It's more than convenience," Cassie said firmly. "It's having someone who loves you in charge of the most important day of your life. That's not something money can buy." The sentiment brought tears to my eyes, though I blinked them away quickly to avoid smudging my own carefully applied makeup. After weeks of tension and complicated emotions, hearing Cassie express genuine appreciation rather than resentment felt like receiving an unexpected gift. Patricia arrived at 9:30, resplendent in a mother-of-the-groom ensemble that managed to be both elegant and appropriately subordinate to the bride's radiance. She had clearly taken care to demonstrate her evolved understanding of family dynamics, greeting me with warm respect and addressing Cassie with genuine maternal affection. "How are we feeling, beautiful bride?" Patricia asked, settling into one of the suite's comfortable chairs. "Any last-minute nerves or concerns?" "Only the normal amount," Cassie replied with a laugh. "Mostly, I'm just excited to marry Trevor and celebrate with everyone we love." "And what about you, Natasha?" Patricia asked, turning her attention to me. "How does it feel to host your sister's wedding at your own venue?" The question was asked with sincere curiosity, rather than the subtle probing that had characterized many of Patricia's previous inquiries. Honestly, it feels perfect, terrifying and wonderful and exactly right all at once. "I can imagine," Patricia said thoughtfully. "The combination of professional responsibility and personal investment must create enormous pressure."
The pressure is worth it, I replied. This is why I got into the hospitality business, to create perfect moments for people celebrating love and family. Having that person be my own sister just makes it more meaningful. As the morning progressed, I moved between my roles as venue owner and sister with surprising ease. One moment I was consulting with vendors about timing adjustments, the next I was helping Cassie into her dress, or coordinating with the photographer about family portraits. The staff understood the personal significance of the day and went above and beyond their usual excellent service, treating Cassie with the special attention reserved for family. Trevor arrived at noon for the traditional first-look photographs, and I watched from a discreet distance as my sister and her fiancé saw each other in their wedding attire for the first time. The genuine emotion on both their faces, surprise, joy, love, and a touch of awe, reminded me why I loved this business, despite its stresses and complications. "They're perfect together," Patricia said,
appearing beside me as we observed the couple's private moment. I was worried initially about social compatibility, but watching them together these past months has shown me that love transcends background differences. It helps when both families make an effort to understand and appreciate each other, I replied diplomatically. Yes, it does, Patricia agreed. And I want you to know that the Ashworth family deeply appreciates having you as part of our extended family. Your professional success and personal character are both impressive, and we're lucky that Trevor is marrying into such an accomplished family. The acknowledgement was gracious and felt genuine rather than performative. Thank you, Patricia. That means a great deal. At 2 o'clock, guests began arriving for the 4 o'clock ceremony. I watched from my office window as cars and hired transportation delivered 400 of Colorado's most prominent families to Wellington Manor. The circular drive filled with luxury vehicles, designer clothing, and the kind of confident social energy that characterized high-end celebrations. My parents arrived early, looking proud and slightly overwhelmed by the grandeur surrounding their daughter's wedding. Dad wore his best suit with obvious comfort, while Mom had invested in a new dress that struck the perfect balance between celebration-appropriate and authentically herself. Watching them greet the Ashworth relatives with warm dignity reminded me of the solid foundation that had shaped both Cassie and me, regardless of our different career paths. Your parents are lovely, Patricia commented as we observed their interactions with other guests. I can see where you and Cassandra developed your strength of character. At 3:30, I made my final rounds before transitioning from venue owner to maid of honor. Every detail was perfect. Flowers arranged precisely as designed, seating coordinated according to family politics and social dynamics, vendors prepared for flawless execution of their respective responsibilities. Wellington Manor looked absolutely magnificent, worthy of its reputation as Colorado's premier wedding venue. But as I changed from my professional attire into my maid of honor dress, I realized that the venue's beauty and the celebration's perfection were secondary to what was actually being celebrated. My sister's happiness, our family's growth, and the triumph of authentic relationships over social pretense. In 30 minutes, I would walk down the aisle ahead of Cassie, not as the venue owner who had made the celebration possible, but as the sister who loved her and wanted nothing more than her complete happiness. After weeks of complicated emotions and professional considerations, that simple truth felt like coming home. The ceremony itself unfolded with the kind of seamless perfection that made months of meticulous planning invisible to guests. As I walked down the petal-strewn aisle ahead of Cassie, carrying a bouquet of cream roses that complemented Alessandro's breathtaking floral installations, I felt the unique satisfaction that comes from witnessing a vision transformed into reality. 400 guests rose as the string quartet began the bridal march, and I took my place at the altar knowing that every detail behind this moment had been executed flawlessly. When Cassie appeared at the garden entrance on her father's arm, radiant in her grandmother's veil and a dress that seemed to capture and reflect the golden afternoon light, the collective intake of breath from the assembled guests was audible. She moved with serene confidence down the aisle lined with white roses and trailing ivy, her smile focused entirely on Trevor, who stood at the altar looking like a man who couldn't believe his good fortune. The ceremony itself was a beautiful blend of traditional elements and personal touches that reflected both families' values. Pastor Williams, who had officiated at dozens of Wellington Manor celebrations, delivered vows that spoke to partnership, growth, and the courage required to build a life together. When Cassie and Trevor exchanged rings and promises they had written themselves, their words carried the weight of genuine commitment rather than social performance. As I watched my sister marry into a family that now understood and valued her true worth, I felt a profound sense of completion that had nothing to do with professional achievement. This celebration represented the successful navigation of complex family dynamics, the triumph of authenticity over assumption, and the power of honest communication to transform relationships.
The reception that followed exceeded even my highest expectations for Wellington Manor's capabilities. As guests moved from the garden ceremony to our elegantly appointed ballroom, they encountered an environment that perfectly balanced grandeur with warmth. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across tables adorned with Alessandro's spectacular centerpieces, while Pierre's catering team orchestrated a dinner service that would be discussed in Denver's social circles for months to come. During the cocktail hour, I circulated between my roles as hostess and family member, ensuring that everything proceeded smoothly while also connecting with relatives I hadn't seen in months. Uncle Robert, my father's brother, who had always been skeptical of my impractical career choice, approached me with obvious amazement about the venue and celebration. "Natasha, I had no idea you were operating at this level," he said, gesturing toward the beautifully appointed space. "This is extraordinary. You've built something truly impressive here." Similar conversations occurred throughout the evening as extended family members and family friends processed the revelation that the Hartwell daughter they'd considered the practical one had actually built a business that hosted celebrations for Colorado's social elite. The recognition felt validating, but more importantly, it seemed to shift how my own family viewed the choices I'd made and the path I'd followed. During dinner, Patricia rose to offer a toast that surprised me with its thoughtfulness and emotional depth. "Tonight, we're not just celebrating the union of Trevor and Cassandra," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the ballroom. "We're celebrating the joining of two families who have taught each other important lessons about assumptions, worth, and the difference between social status and personal character." She paused, looking directly at me before continuing. "I want to publicly acknowledge that I initially underestimated the Hartwell family's accomplishments and contributions. That was my failing, not theirs. Tonight's celebration is possible because of Natasha's extraordinary talent and professionalism, and I'm grateful that my son is marrying into a family with such strength, intelligence, and integrity." The toast received enthusiastic applause, but more importantly, it represented a public acknowledgement of the growth that had occurred in all our relationships over the past months. Patricia's words weren't just polite social rhetoric, they reflected genuine learning and appreciation that had emerged from confronting her own biases. When Cassie and Trevor took the floor for their first dance, moving together to a song that spoke of building dreams and facing the future as partners, the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. The moment was magical in the way that only authentic love can create, and I felt profound gratitude for my role in making it possible. My own turn came during the traditional father-daughter and family dances. When Dad took my hand for our dance, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," he said as we moved slowly across the floor. "Not just for this beautiful venue or your business success, but for the way you've handled yourself through all the family complications. You've shown grace under pressure." "Thank you, Dad. That means everything to me. Your mother and I owe you an apology. We spent so many years focusing on Cassie's need for encouragement that we forgot to properly celebrate your achievements. That won't happen again." Later in the evening, as the celebration continued with dancing and conversation that would extend well past midnight, I found myself on Wellington Manor's terrace with Trevor's father, Richard Ashworth. We stood looking out over the garden where Cassie and Trevor had just married, both of us reflecting on the day's significance. "You've built something remarkable here, Natasha," Richard said, his tone carrying the respect of one business owner addressing another. "Wellington Manor's reputation in Denver's business community is exceptional. You should be very proud." "Thank you. It's been challenging but incredibly rewarding work." "I imagine it has, and I want you to know that the Ashworth family considers themselves fortunate to be connected to someone with your professional caliber and personal character." As the evening wound down and guests began departing with effusive compliments about the celebration, I realized that this wedding had accomplished something beyond creating a perfect party. It had reset relationships, cleared the air of long-standing assumptions, and established new foundations for family interactions going forward. Cassie found me during the final hour of the reception, still radiant despite hours of celebration. Tasha, I need you to know that this was absolutely perfect. Not just the venue and vendors and coordination, but everything, the whole experience.
I'm so glad, Cassie. You deserved nothing less than perfect. But more than that, she continued, I'm grateful for how this whole process brought us closer together, the ownership revelation and all the complicated emotions. They were difficult, but they also forced us to have conversations we probably needed to have years ago. She was right. The wedding planning process had created opportunities for growth and understanding that might never have occurred under normal circumstances. By forcing all of us to confront assumptions and address relationship dynamics, the experience had strengthened rather than strained family bonds. As I watched Cassie and Trevor depart for their honeymoon suite, the same restored Victorian quarters where Martha Wellington had once lived when she owned the property, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that went beyond professional accomplishment. I had successfully hosted my sister's wedding, navigated complex family dynamics, and proven that success doesn't require abandoning your roots or compromising your values. Wellington Manor had provided the perfect setting for a perfect celebration, but more importantly, it had been the backdrop for a family learning to see each other clearly and appreciate each other fully. 6 months after Cassie's wedding, the ripple effects of that perfect celebration continued to reshape both my personal and professional life in ways I hadn't anticipated. Wellington Manor's reputation had reached new heights following the Ashworth Hartwell wedding, with inquiries from prospective clients increasing by 40% and bookings extending 18 months into the future. But the most significant changes weren't reflected in profit margins or industry recognition. They were visible in the transformed relationships that had emerged from our family's journey through social assumptions and personal revelations. The morning I'm thinking of specifically was a crisp October day when I received a call that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. Patricia Ashworth was requesting a meeting to discuss what she described as a business proposition of mutual interest. Her tone carried none of the condescension that had once characterized our interactions, replaced instead by the professional respect of one successful woman addressing another. We met at Wellington Manor, in the same parlor where I had finally revealed my ownership 6 months earlier. Patricia arrived carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the kind of focused expression I'd learned to associate with her most ambitious projects. Natasha, I have an unusual request, she began without preamble. Richard and I have been discussing ways to expand our involvement in Denver's cultural and charitable community. We're particularly interested in establishing a scholarship fund for students from modest backgrounds who show exceptional promise in hospitality and business management. I listened with growing interest as she outlined their vision for a program that would provide both financial support and mentorship opportunities for young people pursuing careers in event management, hospitality, and related fields. We want to call it the Wellington Manor Educational Initiative, and we'd like you to serve as the program director. Your expertise in the industry, combined with your own background of building success without family connections, makes you the ideal person to guide these students. The proposal was both generous and shrewdly conceived. The Ashworth name would provide credibility and funding, while Wellington Manor would offer real-world experience and professional networking opportunities. Students would gain access to internships, mentorship, and the kind of industry connections that typically required family wealth or social status to obtain. Why this particular focus, I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Patricia's smile carried a note of self-awareness I'd rarely seen from her. Our family learned some valuable lessons about assumptions and potential this year. We discovered that talent and determination often exist in places we weren't looking, and we want to help address that oversight systematically. Over the following hour, we discussed program structure, selection criteria, and implementation timelines.
Patricia's vision was comprehensive and thoughtful, addressing not just financial barriers, but also the cultural obstacles that often prevented talented students from pursuing careers in luxury hospitality. "I want these students to walk into rooms like this," she said, gesturing around Wellington Manor's elegant parlor, "with confidence and belonging, not gratitude and intimidation. They should know they've earned their place through merit, not charity." The conversation reminded me of my own early days in the industry, when I'd felt constantly aware of my background and uncertain about my right to occupy spaces designed for Colorado's social elite. The program Patricia was proposing could spare other young people that particular struggle while providing them with opportunities I'd had to create for myself. 2 weeks later, I received another unexpected call, this one from Cassie. She and Trevor had returned from their extended European honeymoon with news that would further reshape our family dynamics. "We're moving back to Colorado permanently," Cassie announced during our first post-honeymoon lunch. "Trevor's been offered a position heading his father's sustainable development division, and I've decided to expand my event planning business beyond corporate functions."
Her enthusiasm was infectious as she described her vision for creating a company that specialized in environmentally conscious celebrations, weddings and events that prioritized sustainability without sacrificing elegance or sophistication. "I want to prove that luxury and environmental responsibility aren't mutually exclusive," she explained. "And I was hoping Wellington Manor might be interested in partnering with me to develop a signature eco-friendly wedding package." The proposal was brilliant, both personally and professionally. Cassie's natural creativity and social skills, combined with her new understanding of luxury market expectations, positioned her perfectly to pioneer this emerging niche. Meanwhile, Wellington Manor could differentiate itself by offering environmentally conscious options that appealed to younger clients who valued sustainability. "I'd love to explore that partnership," I told her. "But I've one condition. This has to be a genuine business collaboration, not family charity. If we're going to work together, it needs to be because your ideas are profitable, not because you're my sister." Cassie's grin was radiant. "I wouldn't want it any other way. I've learned something important this year about the difference between help and condescension. I want to earn this partnership through excellent work, not family connections." Our collaboration launched 3 months later with an eco-luxury wedding that featured locally sourced flowers, organic catering, renewable energy sources, and waste reduction strategies that eliminated 70% of typical event waste without compromising guest experience. The celebration was featured in 3 industry publications and generated enough interest to establish Cassie's company as a leader in sustainable luxury events. The success of both ventures, Patricia's scholarship program and Cassie's environmental initiative, represented a kind of full-circle completion of the journey we'd all taken through assumptions, revelations, and relationship reconstruction. Each project addressed different aspects of the social dynamics we'd navigated during the wedding planning process. On a personal level, the changes in my family relationships proved even more significant than the professional developments. My parents had begun regularly attending industry events and taking obvious pride in both their daughters' achievements. Sunday dinners now included animated discussions about business strategy, industry trends, and professional challenges, with both Cassie and I treated as equal contributors to family conversations. Most remarkably, Patricia Ashworth had become something approaching a genuine friend. Our business collaboration had evolved into personal respect and mutual appreciation for each other's strengths. She still moved in Denver's most exclusive social circles, but her perspective on worth and potential had fundamentally shifted. "You know what I learned from this entire experience?" Patricia said during one of our scholarship program planning meetings. "I spent so many years focused on maintaining social status that I forgot to pay attention to actual accomplishment. It took being embarrassed by my own assumptions to realize how much I was missing."
As I sit in my office at Wellington Manor now, reviewing applications for our second scholarship cohort and planning marketing strategies for Cassie's expanded eco-luxury services, I often reflect on the unexpected journey that brought me to this point. A year ago, I was a hidden venue owner, secretly successful but publicly invisible, managing family relationships through careful omission rather than honest communication. Today, I'm the recognized owner of Colorado's premier wedding venue, director of an educational initiative that's changing lives, business partner to my sister in an environmentally conscious luxury company, and valued family member whose achievements are celebrated rather than minimized. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal, relational, and deeply satisfying in ways that quarterly profit reports could never capture. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where family assumptions limited your ability to share your successes? Or perhaps you've discovered that the people who underestimated you were exactly the ones who needed to learn the most about potential and worth? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if my journey from just the help to the boss resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about navigating family dynamics, building professional success, and the sweet satisfaction that comes from proving doubters wrong through excellent work rather than defensive arguments. Most importantly, remember that your worth isn't determined by other people's assumptions or expectations. Sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated is simply continuing to build something beautiful and letting your work speak for itself. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember, those who seat you with the catering staff today might be asking for your professional expertise tomorrow. Never let someone else's limited vision limit your own potential. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.